Hey, what's up guys? Today, I'll show you a sci-fi horror film, Species, Part 1. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie takes place in the US government laboratories at Utah, where a 12-year-old girl, Sil, sleeps in her containment chamber. She shortly wakes up confused as scientists surround her chamber, carrying cyanide gas tanks. She looks up to see the head of the experiment. The head scientist named Fitch mouths an apology to her. Soon, two scientists install cyanide gas tanks to her chamber and release the gas to kill her. They expect her to die, but Sil only breaks the glass window and escapes until she exits the laboratory. She then climbs into a moving cargo train to hide from her pursuers. Later on, she decides to sleep, but a transient interrupts her slumber to assault her. Thankfully, she possesses great strength that's enough to throw the transient onto a wall, killing him instantly. Afterward, she steals his clothes to blend among the people. The next morning, Fitch and his team thoroughly sweep the perimeter to search for Sil, but they can't find any traces of her. Meanwhile, the cargo train arrives at the train station, and Sil goes out to eat, but she has no money. She also fails to steal food, so she just leaves the store. Outside, she snatches a duffel bag from an unattended cart and boards a train bound for Los Angeles. Inside the train, she steals money from the cash register and more food in the train's kitchen to satisfy her starvation. Later on, Sil returns to her room and pays for her ticket in half price to the conductor, who willingly gives her a discount for being a kid. In the evening, Fitch and his team arrive at the train station, but they only find the dead transient in the cargo train. They confirm Sil killed the dead man due to her DNA and hormone traces on his body. Out of desperation, Fitch's team suggests stopping all train activities, but it would arouse suspicion among the police. They must maintain discretion while searching for her, so Fitch composes a specialized crew to hunt down Sil. In the lab, Fitch meets the crew, who are responsible for tracking down Sil. The team consists of Dr. Stephen, an anthropologist, Dr. Laura, a molecular biologist, Dan, a heightened empath, and Preston, a mercenary. They familiarize themselves first, before Fitch briefs them about past events and their current situation. It's revealed that in November 1974, a project was initiated at Arecibo to search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they used powerful radio dishes to convey a message in the heavens, searching for any alien civilization. Their message includes vital information about humankind, like human DNA structure, a map of the solar system, and Earth population. In January 1993, they finally received two messages from an unknown extraterrestrial in the cosmos. The first message was a superior catalyst for methane to produce an infinite source of energy, and the second is an instruction on how to combine a new DNA structure with human DNA. Afterward, Fitch and his team injected the hybrid DNA structure into 100 human ova, but only 3 survived. While the 2 were stored, the remaining ova, with codename S1L, is permitted to mature, but we prefer to call her Sil. Fitch made Sil a female because of an assumption that women are more docile and controllable than men. Moreover, Sil showed a rapid growth rate, like turning 12 after 3 months of birth. One night, they caught on camera her back moving while she was asleep. The unexplainable movement in Sil's body compelled the team to terminate her out of fear, but she escaped during the attempt to kill her, as shown at the beginning of the film. Now Fitch concludes he needs the crew to hunt down Sil to prevent more unwanted deaths, like the transient in the cargo train. Meanwhile, Sil undergoes the next phase at the train, where her body extends tentacles to form a cocoon shell, so she can mature into a fully developed adult. She also murders the conductor mercilessly, and subsequently emerges naked from the shell as an adult woman. The following morning, Sil arrives in LA. She then leaves the train, wearing the conductor's uniform. On her way out of the station, Sil sees a queue of blonde girls, thinking they're part of Fitch's search operation for her. Meanwhile, the crew goes to the train where Sil was before, and finds her shell and the dead conductor in her room. They know that Sil's an adult now, just by the look of the cocoon in front of them. Thus, they've been searching for the wrong body the whole time. Outside the train, Preston requests to keep track of the transactional activities of the conductor's credit card, because he presumes Sil has taken it. Dan also incites that Sil remorselessly kills when she's threatened. Stephen agrees and informs everyone that LA is the perfect place for Sil to hide, since people rarely notice anything wrong in that place. At LA, while Sil buys a gown from a pregnant tailor, she gazes at the tailor's baby bump. She next tours the city, where she encounters mothers with their children passing by on the street. Afterward, she rents a room at a motel, and inside, she scans television shows, displaying the car crash, a man and woman making out, a hair dye commercial, and even a Daniel C.C. horror movie. Meanwhile, the crew arrive in LA, where they stay in a hotel while the operation is active. At the lobby, Laura suggests doing an experiment solely focusing on the alien DNA structure in order to learn its weaknesses. They agree with Laura, since Sil definitely uses her human features to camouflage among the people. Fitch then shortly permits their offer and allows them to use the laboratory installed in the hotel to learn what kind of creature they're dealing with. At the lab, Laura leads the test by injecting the alien DNA structure into a cell, but during the experiment, the installed camera facing the cell shuts down suddenly. Laura goes to replace the camera herself. Preston accompanies her inside the chamber, where the injected cell is inside a glass box case. When Laura finally replaces the camera, Fitch and others watch the cell mutating rapidly on the monitor. Fitch rushes Laura and Preston to close the lid, but Preston drops the bolt on the floor grill. Dan then asks Fitch to open the doors, but he refuses because it's against protocol to open the doors while the lid is still unsealed. In a matter of minutes, the cell grows into a large tentacle, and Fitch activates an incinerator to burn the tentacle, but it only evades the fire and hides in between the pipes. Preston snatches a pipe on the wall and pierces the tentacle repeatedly until it stops moving. Just then, Fitch activates the emergency button to burn the whole room because the tentacle is still alive, spreading rapidly on the walls. However, it burns the whole room, including Preston and Laura inside the containment. Dan and Stephen want to save them, so Dan restrains Fitch away from the panel, and Stephen quickly pushes the button to open the doors. After the two safely go outside, Stephen burns the whole room to kill the tentacle. Meanwhile, Sil asks the motel manager where to find a hormone-rich man, and the manager recommends a club nearby. But before she leaves, the manager asks for Sil's card in case an emergency occurs in her room while she's away. Sil gives the conductor's card, and the moment it is swiped on the machine, the transaction appears on the crew's list of tracks. While the crew rushes to the motel, Sil enters the club that was recommended to her. Just then, a man invites her to dance, but a curly-haired woman interjects and steals him from her. Sil perceives the curly-haired woman as a competition, so she follows her to the bathroom and eliminates her permanently. She then returns to the dance floor, removes her top, and invites a clubber for some action. Soon, he and Sil go to the parking lot and drive on the way to his mansion. Meanwhile, the crew visits the motel to retrieve the surveillance footage that caught Sil's blurry face on camera. Fitch asks for the tape, so they can analyze the footage thoroughly in the lab. Afterward, Fitch asks the manager where Sil has gone, and the manager says to the club nearby. At the club, a female clubber screams for help when she finds the dead curly-haired woman in the bathroom stall. The crew arrives shortly to see the corpse, but there's no sign of Sil. They proceed to interrogate the bouncers if Sil entered the club earlier, and one of them says she left with a male clubber. Meanwhile, the clubber and Sil arrive at his mansion. He entices her to begin. Sil suddenly withdraws and wants to leave, possibly because his hormone smell is not fit for her. Sil pretends to kiss him passionately and kills him using her elongated, juicy tongue. Afterward, Sil rinses off the blood in the shower. Just then, the crew surrounds the mansion, but Sil escapes quickly with the clubber's BMW after sensing their arrival. Preston surveys the area first and finds the clubber lying dead on the floor. Fitch questions why Sil killed the curly-haired woman and the clubber. Stephen answers Sil is a psychopath who doesn't have moral senses and social structure. Laura adds that Sil didn't grow up being taught with good manners or feel love from anyone. However, Fitch feels unsatisfied with their answers, so Dan simplifies that the clubber did something bad, which provoked Sil to kill him, because Sil kills anyone who threatens or intervenes in her way of the life cycle. Laura concludes that Sil is trying to reproduce with a hormone-rich man, which is why she killed the woman due to sexual competition. Moreover, they find evidence that Sil rejected the clubber because he was too diabetic, based on the insulin bottle in his bathroom bin. Overall, Sil only mates with someone healthy, and not with someone who has genetic damage, defects, or hereditary disease. Next, Fitch orders to track down the clubber's BMW to find Sil's whereabouts. Afterward, they plan to return to the motel to examine Sil's rented room. Preston spontaneously mentions Fitch's assumption about women being docile and controllable, which is proven wrong after dealing with Sil. At the motel, the crew examines Sil's room. Laura takes a sample of Sil's blood, drop it on the toilet seat to know if it's menstrual blood, because if it does, then Sil's capable of reproduction. Meanwhile, Sil drives in front of the motel, but since she finds it surrounded by Fitch's men, Sil travels to Santa Monica and falls asleep in the car. The next morning, Sil wakes up after dreaming about mating with an alien while in her alien form. She goes back to driving, but she soon runs out of gas, so she abandons it and decides to take a stroll. Unfortunately, a reckless driver runs at Sil, throwing her onto the bus stop. Sil is badly wounded, but a kind businessman nicknamed Mr. Wright rushes her to Park Bay Hospital immediately. At Park Bay Hospital, Mr. Wright pays for Sil's medical bills via credit card. Meanwhile, a doctor examines Sil's wounds, but he freezes upon witnessing Sil healing herself. Sil exits the room like nothing happened, leaving the doctor astounded. She then meets Mr. Wright to ask if they can finally go back to his home. Meanwhile, the crew is at the laboratory, trying to enhance the surveillance footage of Sil, but it's useless since she didn't face the camera. Afterward, they tackle Sil's biological aspect, presuming Sil is in her 20s already with a fully developed reproductive system, since her biological clock is in hyperdrive. They worry that if Sil manages to give birth to a male offspring who has the same growth rate as hers, it could impregnate more women after 6 months of reaching maturity. Just then, they receive a report about the clubber's abandoned BMW in Santa Monica. Soon, the crew arrives in the city, where they find the clubber's car. Fitch's assistant informs them about a doctor in Park Bay who witnessed a miraculous regeneration earlier. Instantly, they know he's talking about Sil, so Fitch sends his team to investigate the hospital. At the hospital, the duo learns a man called Mr. Wright brought Sil to the ER due to a hit and run. They need to locate Mr. Wright's address, but the receptionist tells them that Mr. Wright only disclosed his card details. Fortunately, Laura tracks Mr. Wright using only his card information. They eventually learn his address in no time and proceed to travel to his house. Meanwhile, Mr. Wright brings Sil to his home, where they take a Polaroid together, but Sil looks away due to the blinding flash. Next, Sil persistently tries to mate with Mr. Wright, but he refuses. Soon, their attempt is interrupted when the crew arrives in the vicinity. She then transforms to her bipedal alien form, where her back and shoulders sprout elongated tentacles. She kills Mr. Wright and seeks refuge in his garden to hide from the crew. Preston and Laura enter first, seeing dead Mr. Wright afloat in the hot tub. Preston surveys the garden, but he fails to find Sil, who's hiding behind a wooden fence. Eventually, the crew searches the vicinity thoroughly, concluding Sil failed to mate with Mr. Wright despite her fondness for him. Meanwhile, Sil reverts to her naked human form, runs to a nearby store, and pretends to be a victim of assault. A woman falls for her trap and soon gets tied up by Sil in her own car. Sil then returns to Mr. Wright's mansion to eavesdrop on the crew's discussion in the front yard. Sil reads Fitch's lips, learning their plan of staking the whole club tomorrow night as they anticipate her arrival. The next morning, Sil plots to fake her death to stop them from pursuing her. She first mutilates her thumb and the woman she abducted. Next, she formulates a scenario where she crashes into the transformer below the hill. Then, she hoards gas in plastic bottles and transfers them all to another car she has stolen. That night, Sil goes to the club to lure the crew, provoking them to chase her. Sil rides in the stolen car filled with gas, and the abducted woman sits beside her. She drives straight to the hills as the crew pursues her. Just as she planned, she swerves the car off-hill and directly crashes the car onto the transformer, causing an explosion. Afterward, the choppers drop cluster bombs onto the explosion to be certain that Sil is dead. Fitch is convinced that Sil is dead because his team found a severed, charred thumb stuck on the door that was ripped off. Fitch assumes Sil failed to escape, but Dan and Preston find the whole victory to be coincidental and convenient. Fitch doesn't listen anymore and dismisses them because their job is finished. In fact, Sil is still alive. She escaped just in time before the car exploded. She also dyes her hair brunette and cuts it short to test if the crew can recognize her. When she is finally at the hotel, no one recognizes her at all. She then uses the chance to mate with Preston, but Preston is already busy with Laura in her room. Sil gets jealous, but she shortly recovers upon seeing Stephen enter the room. Stephen feels lucky to have a free sex, and Sil successfully gets pregnant afterward. But he soon realizes her true identity, which causes Sil to kill him. Meanwhile, Dan warns the crew that Sil is in the building. They initially doubt if it's true, until they see Stephen dead, and Sil breaks out from his room in her alien form. The crew pursues Sil to the sewer under the hotel while equipped with flamethrowers. At the sewer, Dan fails to locate Sil because she's underwater, prompting the group to split up. Unfortunately, Sil immediately murders Fitch the moment he's alone. Afterward, Sil seeks refuge in a nearby cave, where she finally gives birth to a male offspring, who matures into a toddler under a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, the team arrives at the cave, where they see an oil pond in the middle. Just then, Dan meets Sil's offspring, coaxing him to join them, but the offspring attacks him, causing him to stumble backward. Laura, who's behind Dan, drops onto the oil pond and gets stuck. Dan stands back up quickly and incinerates the offspring, but he staggers as the offspring leap above him, catching fire and falling into the oil pond. The oil pond bursts into flames, and Dan dangles on the edge. The offspring screeches while dying from the heat, alerting Sil from her hideout. On the other hand, Laura is stuck and shouts to ask for Preston's help, but he's busy fighting against Sil, where he manages to amputate one of her GPS tentacles. Eventually, Laura escapes from the oil pond before the fire completely spreads and climbs to help Dan. The movie ends with Preston successfully gunning down Sil until she drops into the burning oil. Laura then helps Preston to hoist Dan from the edge, but Sil grabs Dan's feet to ascend. Fortunately, Preston quickly reloads his shotgun to burst Sil's head to pieces. Subsequently, the three survivors exit the cave and return to the hotel. However, after their small victory, a mutated rat transforms after gnawing Syl's mutilated tentacle and eats another rat. Species Part 2. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins in space, where Captain Patrick leads his space crew, Anna and Dennis, on a space expedition to Mars. Afterward, Patrick descends from the spacecraft and lands on Mars to release the rover and let it harvest the soil they need. Their whole expedition is broadcasted worldwide, and Patrick delivers a motivational speech that his achievement as the first man on Mars is for all humankind. Patrick is a renowned son of a U.S. senator and is also a football star at Yale besides being an astronaut. The soils that are harvested are placed in each capsule, and Patrick brings them back to the spacecraft. Anna and Dennis welcome Patrick back on board and applaud his great service to the country. Afterward, the U.S. president calls them to congratulate them on their successful expedition. Next, they place the soils in a freezer panel, but one capsule thaws and beaks open, where a gooey and elastic creature emerges from the container. The creature slithers on the floor and attacks each crew, resulting in their disconnection from radio contact to mission control. Meanwhile, an institutionalized professor watches the news broadcasting the contact gap from the space crew. He screams hysterically and destroys the television. He claims he warned them not to go to Mars, but they ignored him. 7 minutes later, the space crew reconnects contact with mission control and subsequently proceeds to go back to Earth. Back on Earth, Dr. Laura meets Colonel Burgess and the three generals for another test trial. She first briefs them about the extraterrestrial vulnerability experiment, which aims to discover a method on how to defend Earth in case of an alien invasion. Then she introduces Eve, who's formed from a frozen lab embryo and is also a genetic duplicate of the original Syl. Laura strictly maintains the facility man-proof to prevent Eve from direct contact with hormone-rich men, which explains why Burgess and the generals can only watch behind a tinted room. Afterward, Laura initiates the test, where a toxic gas is sprayed onto Eve. Eve receives blisters from the toxin, but her body adapts and regenerates instantly. The trial is a failure again, but the generals encourage Laura to continue the experiments. The trial now ends, and Laura enters the glass chamber to check up on Eve. Eve wonders if they only perceive her as a laboratory animal. Laura apologizes for the painful trial, but she reassures her that her safety is completely considered during experiments. Eve then hopes that they don't forget that she's also a human. Meanwhile, the space crew returns to Earth and receives a preliminary health inspection from Dr. Orinsky at Oldham Space Center in Maryland. Strangely, the test results conclude they're all healthy, but they still need to undergo quarantine for 10 days, which means they're prohibited from committing any hormone activity. Next, the space crew attend a fundraiser held for them. The senator declares an opening speech to the guests, telling them his dream to expand expeditions into space is fulfilled because of his son, Patrick. However, throughout the fundraiser, Patrick misses out on the speech because he's busy making out with a woman. Dennis searches for Patrick, and Anna guesses he might be feeling unwell too, like her. But Dennis ignores her concern and says they only need some love to recover. The senator finishes his speech and calls for his son on the stage. When Patrick hears his name, he abruptly ends the session with the woman and goes on the stage to deliver his speech. After the speech, Patrick meets the woman again for an unexpected threesome with her sister. While Patrick engages in the hormone hide-and-seek, Eve feels their hormone magnetic fields as her body sweats profusely and her pulse goes berserk. Suddenly, the two sisters die as their stomach inflates and give birth to half-alien, half-human babies. They mature rapidly as kids in a matter of hours. Patrick then brings his fat sons to a shed owned by his senator father. The following day, Patrick tells his father that something is wrong with him since he arrived from Mars yesterday. He wants him to listen and help him with his problem because he's scared of what's happening in his body, but the senator only ignores his plea and reminds him to behave and concentrate on their political goal to make him the next U.S. president. Meanwhile, at the Oldham Space Center, Orinsky requests to meet the professor in the psychiatric institution because of an important discovery. However, he shortly dies from disembowelment caused by Patrick's seemingly alive blood, which forms an alien claw to gut his innards. The next day, Laura reports to Burgess and the generals about the death of Dr. Orinsky. She also finds a combination of alien-human DNA on his wounds, but Eve is obviously innocent because she's locked in the facility. The only plausible explanation is there's another alien out there who's preying on people. Laura suggests they conduct a normal investigation first, such as listing the possible suspects, and test their blood for verification and confirmation of their involvement in the crime. The generals then consider her suggestion and decide to summon Preston to assist on their alien hunt. Soon, Burgess meets Preston, who's now an owner of a private sector that maintains diplomatic security nationwide. Preston automatically refuses upon learning it's another alien hunt, but he eventually agrees after Burgess bribes him with money and tax exemption. Later on, Burgess and Preston barge into the facility without Laura's permission. Laura gets mad at Burgess for disregarding her regulation within the facility and immediately asks them to discuss it outside the lab. Unfortunately, it's too late, for Eve has already seen Preston and something inside her awakens. It turns out, when Eve was created, Laura dampened her mating instinct and only activated her human side. Moreover, Eve can't leave the facility, otherwise, a toxic capsule would explode in her head to dispatch her instantly. The small talk between Laura and Preston grows into an argument, prompting Burgess to intervene and remind them that they need to work together as directly ordered by the Pentagon. On the same day, Laura and Preston visit the professor in a psychiatric institute to learn why Orensky wanted to see him prior to his unexpected death. Soon, Preston and Laura meet the professor to interview him about his knowledge about the aliens in Mars, and the professor willingly tells them everything he knows. It's revealed that the professor conducted research focusing on a Mars meteorite discovered in the Antarctic in 1996. They determined carbon-based elements were in the fossils found within the meteorite. These elements only exist in the Magellanic Galaxy, which is 100 million light-years away, which implies that there once was an alien civilization on Mars. The professor believed a specific alien species invaded the thriving planet of Mars approximately 1 billion years ago, which resulted in its downfall and extinction. The professor tried stopping the US government from continuing the expedition to Mars because the suspected violent alien species and their DNA might still be on the planet, and if it ever made contact with humans, it could engender biological contamination. However, the government only ignored and fired him from Stanford. His termination from his profession provoked him to assault a Pentagon general, which eventually led to his institutionalization. Laura proceeds to ask for his insight about why Orensky called him, and he gives a confident answer that the call meant to prove that he was right about the aliens on Mars all along, because the alien species that destroyed Mars is now brought down to Earth. Afterward, Preston and Laura return to the facility and appeal to Burgess for a manhunt for the 3 astronauts so they can do blood analysis and verify if they are a carrier of an alien. Burgess reluctantly agrees because it involves Patrick, but he still lets them search and test Patrick first, since their 10-day quarantine is about to end and procreation might soon be inevitable. At night, Preston and Laura lead the manhunt and visit Patrick's house first, but he's missing because he's currently in a cabin in the woods with his girlfriend. His girlfriend insists on letting go of their hormones, even though he's feeling unwell. Next, Preston and Laura arrive at Anna and her husband's residency. They discover an alien tentacle extending straight out from Anna's inflated stomach onto her husband's face. Preston shoots the GPS tentacle and Laura sprays toxic gas onto Anna's stomach, but they're too late because the couple are dead. Fortunately, the second team successfully locates Dennis on a yacht with a woman and delivers him to the lab for blood analysis. While waiting for the blood result, Burgess asks Dennis if he knows what happened during the 7-minute contact gap in space, but Dennis answers he doesn't remember anything. Burgess then asks when was the last time he saw Anna, and Dennis replies that it was during the fundraiser. Preston grimly reveals to Dennis that Anna is dead, and Dennis deduces they suspect him of murdering her. Just then, Preston receives a call from Laura, confirming that the alien human DNA in Anna's body varies from the DNA found in Orensky's body. Now, the culprit narrows down between Dennis and Patrick, but then Dennis's blood test result shortly comes out to show he's clean from alien infection. Burgess then dismisses Dennis and asks him to report to them immediately if he finally finds Patrick. Meanwhile, Laura accompanies a pathologist to conduct an autopsy on Anna's body. Suddenly, a large tentacle emerges from Anna's mouth, and the pathologist quickly slices it off using an electric saw. The following day, Patrick finds his girlfriend dead with a hollow womb on the bed and his hybrid son in front of him. He wants to end the misery, so he blows up his own head, but it only grows back and regenerates. He's unaware that Dennis is watching him from afar, who runs to the facility quickly to report what happened. At night, Dennis visits the facility and reports to the group about Patrick's regeneration. The discovery points them to Patrick as the culprit for Orensky's death and the source of alien infection. Dennis then asks them why they were sent to Mars if it's dangerous in the first place, and Preston explains the government ignored the warning. Laura adds that the alien came from the soil they gathered from Mars, which helps Dennis to recall that during the contact gap, he felt it was terrible. Moreover, an important discovery takes place between Eve and Patrick. Patrick is controlled by his alien side, and he mates religiously with more women, where he ends up with over 20 fat sons, hiding in his father's secret shed in the woods. The next day, Laura meets Burgess and the generals in the facility. Burgess wants to use Eve to help telepathically locate Patrick, but this comes with a price, because allowing Eve to use telepathy means awakening her dormant alien genetics via cyclotron. Once Eve feels her alien genes, she becomes stronger, angrier, and her mating drive increases. However, Laura disapproves because the process is painful and regards Eve as a human too, but Burgess forces her to do it since it's her job. The gentlemen leave to give Laura time to work, and Laura visits Eve teary-eyed because she doesn't want to hurt her again. But Eve says she can do it, so she can help her. Her consent allows them to begin the procedure. During the procedure, Eve endures the pain until she finally connects to Patrick's mind, where she sees everything. Through this method, Laura successfully learns Patrick's current destination and immediately updates Preston and Dennis, who are on the lookout for the road. Unfortunately, the downside of this method is Patrick can also sense Eve, who's definitely concupiscent. Patrick then willingly surrenders to Preston and Dennis so he can reach Eve for mating. Preston and Dennis deliver Patrick to the facility, despite doubting his true intentions of surrendering so quickly. At the facility, Eve and Patrick lock their eyes on each other, triggering Eve's mating instinct. Patrick tells Laura to release Eve, but Laura refuses to follow. Patrick then attacks Laura to force her, but Preston arrives on time and repels Patrick by spraying toxic gas onto him. Meanwhile, Burgess discloses to the senator everything happening to Patrick and demands him to help capture Patrick. The senator already foresees the military is going to kill his son, so he reckons Patrick is possibly hiding in his secret shed in the woods. At night, the senator visits Patrick in the shed to apologize for doubting and ignoring his plea for help. They reconcile and embrace for a moment, triggering Patrick's human side to surface. However, Patrick's alien genetics fights back and resurfaces in his body. Patrick then heartlessly kills his father and shortly returns to the shed so he can assist his hybrid sons to enter their cocoons. At the facility, Laura discovers the alien DNA rejected Dennis during their expedition because he has sickle cell disease. The alien species are vulnerable to human genetic diseases, which helps Laura to grab the opportunity and utilize Dennis's blood as a weapon against the alien species. However, during their discussion, Eve escapes from the facility to reunite with Patrick. Instantly, military soldiers work together to stop Eve from escaping, but she only heals from all the gunshot wounds and proceeds to run away. The group in the military immediately pursue Eve, following her to Patrick's secret shed. Laura then incorporates Dennis' blood into a toxic gas, and the group uses it to spray onto the cocoons hanging in the ceiling, causing all the cocoons to die as Dennis' blood kills them. Meanwhile, Eve and Patrick morph into their alien form and mate the moment they see each other. But Preston and Dennis find them in a room and quickly intervene to stop their hormone exchange. Eve finally breaks free from Patrick and attacks him after hearing Laura tell her that Patrick is behind her. Eve extends her spine to pierce Patrick, but Patrick only throws her onto a wall and kills her instantly. Laura bellows a cry as she witnesses Eve dies before her. Patrick approaches Preston next to attack him, and Dennis directs Preston to stab his leg with a pitchfork to coat it in his blood. Preston follows the instruction and then hurls the pitchfork at Patrick. Patrick weakens and shortly dies as Dennis' blood slowly infiltrates his whole body. The movie ends with Burgess and his men escorting the group outside the shed. Dennis is brought onto a chopper, while Preston and Laura watch as Eve's human body is being carried into an ambulance. The problem arises when Eve's abdomen inflates rapidly, which means Eve is still alive and is about to give birth to a baby with Patrick as the father. At the far corner of the ambulance, one of Patrick's alien sons quietly watches Eve, who screams loudly as she gives birth to her fat alien baby. Species, Part 3. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie resumes the time when lifeless Eve lies inside an ambulance. Unfortunately, the chopper loses track of the vehicle because the main driver, Dr. Abbott, detours from the road. Abbott wants to steal Eve's body so he can create the purest alien strain out of her DNA. However, his plan is disrupted when the co-driver orders him to stop the car because they're straying from the plan. Abbott then threatens the co-driver with a gun if he doesn't shut his mouth. Suddenly, the astronaut Patrick's half-breed son emerges behind and unexpectedly extends his juicy tongue, not to tongue massage, but to eliminate the co-driver. Abbott runs to the back, witnessing Eve come to life and give birth to an offspring. The half-breed once again attacks and strangles Eve to death, pushing Abbott to steal the fat baby and flee from the crime scene. The chopper eventually locates the ambulance, only to find Eve's body. A government agent orders a full autopsy on Eve and a manhunt for Abbott. Months later, Abbott returns to teaching at a university. He also keeps Eve's baby locked in the laboratory of his house basement to let her mature. Meanwhile, a graduating college student named Dean tours remarkable guests to the power plant facility, where the prototype fusion reactor is built to create limitless fusion energy out of a clean chemical reaction. Unfortunately, Dean can't demonstrate the reactor's potential since the department head, Dr. Turner, isn't around to activate the machine. Dean eventually ends the tour because his roommate and classmate, Hastings, motions to him it's time for class. Soon, Dean arrives at Abbott's class, who's discussing the existence of viruses. When the class finally ends, Dean and Hastings go out to the field. Just then, Turner approaches Dean to talk about something important. Meanwhile, Abbott stands near a public bulletin board and eavesdrops on Turner and Dean's conversation. Dean struggles to obtain results from his multiple projects in different programs, so the department gives two options to Dean. He must soon find an approved project overseen by a professor. Otherwise, the department is going to forfeit his scholarship for the succeeding semesters. Abbott shortly goes home, but he becomes disappointed upon seeing his cat mauled to death by Eve's offspring. She's a little girl now, who's very hungry. Therefore, Abbott and the little girl feast on a lobster as a special request by her. Abbott instructs her to use silverware, but she only pushes them away and continues using her hands. When it's time for dessert, Abbott calls her by the name Sarah. Next, Abbott tucks Sarah to bed. He promises her that she can roam the house as long as she won't go outside. But she can't go out because she's a unique creature who carries a message that needs to be heard. Abbott yearns to know the purpose of why she's sent to Earth, so he takes care of her while waiting for the revelation to arrive. Meanwhile, the agent's fears grow after learning from the autopsy result that Eve gave birth before she died. So he needs to locate the offspring soon, before the situation escalates to another alien hunt. The following day, Abbott receives an unexpected visit from Patrick's grown half-breed son, who's apparently sick due to his swollen stomach. The half-breed needs to see Sarah, but Abbott can't tell him unless he states what for. Abbott withdraws blood from the half-breed to determine the cause of sickness. He learns it's from a simple pollen, but the reaction is too severe. He then tries to cure him, but things only worsen as the half-breed oozes acid from his enlarged pores, and then his abdomen erupts large tentacles. The half-breed dies, and Abbott deduces more half-breeds are coming to get his help. The next day, Abbott calls Dean to show the dead half-breed. While Dean examines the corpse, Abbott explains the man suffered from a flawed gene because he was an outcome of an unfortunate coupling of a human and alien, making him and any half-breed offspring defenseless against common diseases. Abbott then explains his plan to bioengineer a perfect and disease-resistant alien species. But first, they need to dissect the body, then strip out the disease-prone human DNA, and lastly, create a purer strain of alien nucleic acid. Meanwhile, Sarah undergoes the chrysalis stage to mature into an adult. Just then, Turner unexpectedly visits Abbott's house to investigate the lab in the basement, and he encounters Sarah standing naked before him. Sarah tempts Turner to mate, but she changes her mind midway. Her abrupt discontinuation provokes Turner to sexually harass her. His hormone persistence forces her to transform into an alien form, and she kills him with her GPS tentacles to trace and pierce his forehead. Just then, Dean and Abbott arrive home and bring the half-breed's body into the house, where they discover the chrysalis shell in the living room. They search for Sarah all over the house, but only to find Turner's body. Abbott then searches Turner's body to steal his access key card and gives it to Dean. Dean wants to call the police, but Abbott convinces him that the police wouldn't believe an alien attacked Turner, and they would only suspect Dean in the end, since he was the last person whom Turner argued with before he died. Considering the risks, Dean eventually agrees to work together with Abbott as long as he gets shared credits for all the experiments they conduct. Next, Dean dumps Turner's body and his car into a nearby swamp lake. He then returns to the house, worrying about where Sarah might be, but Abbott is certain she's nearby, since they live near a university campus filled with hormone-rich men. At night, Sarah attends a college night out on campus, pushing away anyone who attempts to score on her. Afterward, she ends up meeting an old woman who offers to drive her home. During the trip, Sarah shouts to pull over at an intersection because she senses a half-breed is inside the approaching train. She exits the car to chase after the train, but she trips and the wheels sever her arm. The woman runs to Sarah in an attempt to help her, but upon seeing Sarah grow her arms back, she only drives away quickly. The next day, Sarah comes home and welcomes Dean with a tight grip on his neck. Dean explains he's not a threat, but rather a science partner of Abbott. Sarah eventually lets go of him, so Dean can meet Abbott in the laboratory. While Abbott dissects the body, he explains to Dean that Sarah is healthy because of her superior DNA. Afterward, Abbott briefs Dean on the overall information relating to their project. The first generation of alien species on Earth was bioengineered during the production of Project Athena. The first one was Syl, created with equal parts of human and alien DNA. The second one was Eve, the genetic duplicate of Syl. Their blood chemistry was toxic, which resulted in unpredictable behavior, aggressiveness, and disease-free, but they were slightly susceptible to hydrochloride solution. Next, the second generation of alien species is the half-breeds. They were only evolutionary mistakes, prone to disease and sickness conceived, simply due to the driven lust of the alien-infected astronaut father, Patrick. The third generation is Sarah, a product of Eve and Patrick, making her almost the purest alien species yet, even though she still contains small traces of human DNA. During discussion, Sarah sneaks behind them to tell them that she wants to go out. Abbott lets her go, since human genetics are far inferior to her pure alien strains, which means Sarah doesn't see humans as potential partners. They continue their study, and Dean reads the Project Athena documents. Dean mentions the scientists' mistakes in bioengineering alien species, and Abbott claims he doesn't want to repeat them all. Besides, Abbott plans to inject a half-breed DNA into Sarah's eggs and allow Sarah's human chromosome to temper the mixture. Meanwhile, Sarah meets the half-breed that she sensed from the train to attempt copulation earlier, but she abandons him after sensing he's dying. When Sarah goes home, Dean invites her to play chess. She surprisingly beats him even though it's her first time, because she learned all the moves after simply touching the chess manual. Afterward, Dean returns to his dorm room. Hastings informs him he found a mass email from a sexy woman named Amelia, who's searching for a biochemistry expert. Meanwhile, the mass email also attracts the government's attention. The agent immediately looks it up, and the system detects the terminology used in the email is similar to Project Athena. He instantly orders a thorough search for Amelia and her location. The next day in the lab, while Dean withdraws blood from Sarah, the half-breed from the train infiltrates the lab, mating with Sarah to cure his sickness. Fortunately, Abbott activates the hydrochloride gas spray installed in case of an alien invasion. Abbott then runs to safety, but Dean stays behind because he worries about Sarah. Abbott then explains that Sarah can't be impregnated because he already harvested her eggs on the first night of her maturity and keeps them inside a thermos for safekeeping. The gas soon weakens Sarah, allowing the half-breed to corner her. Fortunately, Dean interferes and attacks the half-breed, but the half-breed quickly grabs him by the ankle and bites his leg. Abbott is forced to help Dean, so he cuts the half-breed's head with a saw. Dean and Sarah escape the lab, but Abbott fails to flee as the half-breed lurches him onto the wall, killing him in the end. The half-breed eventually dies due to the gas, and Dean attempts to save Abbott. However, it's too late since Abbott's chest wound is deep. During Abbott's last breaths, he warns Dean about more half-breeds coming to obtain the eggs, and then his final request consists of creating a new generation of alien species without defects. Dean immediately goes upstairs to clean his bite wound. He warns Sarah that she's in danger, simply because the half-breeds need her eggs to live longer. But Dean doesn't want to fulfill Abbott's final request because it's too dangerous. At night, Dean burns Abbott's body in the swampy lake and shuts down Abbott's laboratory in the basement. He then follows Sarah into the campus, who attempts to mate with him, but he stops her, possibly because he is hormone frustrated. Dean shortly goes back to his dorm room. Just then, he's surprised to hear from Hastings that he stole his notes and has them sent to Amelia. He is enraged by what Hastings did because it only puts them more in danger. However, Hastings only sees notes as fictitious jokes and nothing more, and assumes Amelia is only crazy for taking interest in something fake, so he sends his address to Amelia. The following day, Amelia reveals herself to be real, but dying like the rest of the half-breeds. She visits Hastings in his dorm room to ask more about the experiment data he sent to her last time. Amelia appears to be sweet, but when Hastings clarifies the notes are just jokes, Amelia threatens him to do his job if he wants to live. Meanwhile, Dean is about to enter their dorm room, but he quickly hides in another room to escape from Amelia. Unfortunately, Amelia senses him fast enough to murder the woman in the hall. She stands outside the door where Dean hides, but she returns to Hastings' dorm room and kidnaps him after detecting Sarah's scent is nearby. Dean attempts to save Hastings, but he stops upon realizing that the agent is waiting for him outside campus. He proceeds to enter the car to officially meet the agent. The agent asks what the aliens want from them, and Dean guesses they need someone scientifically smart to bioengineer a new alien strain because the current half-breed generation is considered an endangered species. The agent then tells Dean they need to stop their plan to multiply and spread, so they go back to the dorm room and allow Dean to hack into Abbott's file to learn about the aliens' weaknesses. It turns out the hydrochloride gas can be used to weaken them, but not enough to kill them. Meanwhile, at Abbott's lab, Amelia impales her nail into Hastings to rush him to do his work. She goes upstairs to vomit as her skin rots and oozes liquids. When she returns to the lab, Sarah wants to quit, but Amelia convinces her that she's their only hope to survive. Hastings almost finishes the procedure that night. Once the half-breed DNA is injected into Sarah's egg, they will create a new generation of alien species and let it mature over time. However, Hastings fails to eject the DNA on time because Dean and the agent just throw the gas bomb into the lab to force the two aliens to exit the house. Hastings immediately escapes from the house with the DNA and Sarah's eggs and reunites with Dean and the agent outside the car. The three men drive to the power plant building, luring Amelia and Sarah to follow them. Afterward, Dean separates from the group to activate the reactor using Turner's key access card, whereas the agent and Hastings lure Sarah in the heights using her eggs. Dean activates the timer for the reactor to explode, and he shouts at the agent from the grounds to pass the eggs down to him. Hastings then throws to deliver the thermos to Dean. Dean enters the reactor's interior, luring Sarah and Amelia inside as part of the plan to trap them. Amelia begins to attack Dean and eventually obtains the thermos from him. Afterward, she begins performing a smelly workout with him, but the grounds tremble as the core is about to explode. In the control panel, Hastings and the agent worry about Dean, because if he doesn't close the shaft on time with the remote control, the whole facility will explode. Inside the reactor, Sarah fortunately helps Dean annihilate Amelia. Sarah throws Amelia to the core, but Amelia drags her along too as she drops into the core. Dean shouts as he watches a figure plummet into their hellish death. The core is ready to explode, and Dean closes the shaft on time. The explosion causes an earthquake, but everyone is safe and secure in the facility. Later, Hastings and Dean are resting in their dorm rooms as they watch the agent in the news accuse Turner of being involved in the explosion at the facility. 3 weeks later, Hastings discovers Sarah is still alive in Abbott's house because of Dean's help. Dean explains he saw Sarah clinging to her life after the explosion, so he saved her. He also created a new male alien species using the remaining half-breed DNA, but free from detrimental human strains this time. Dean then criticizes Abbott for relying on Sarah's egg because nothing can be made out of her own genetic material when it should be using another alien DNA with her eggs to create the new species. When the boy finally matured into an adult, he became Sarah's boyfriend. Afterward, Dean and Hastings send the alien couple on a journey. It turns out Dean made the boyfriend sterile to prevent their species from multiplying. But Dean just created a male counterpart for Sarah, so she's not alone in life. Species, Part 4, The Awakening. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins by introducing an intelligent college professor, Miranda. She lives with her uncle Tom, who works as an archivist in a museum. At night, Miranda dresses up for her date night. The next morning, a stranger jogging in the field accidentally discovers Miranda lying naked and unconscious on the sidewalk. He immediately calls for help to deliver Miranda to the emergency room. At the hospital, the nurses ask for her information as they wheel her to a room. Then they call Tom at his home to break the bad news about Miranda's situation. Miranda recalls making out with her date last night, but it only lasted short because her date was shocked upon witnessing her indescribable transformation. Later on, the radiologist studies Miranda's X-ray results, showing a unique skull structure. The radiologist assumes it's only a prank, so he orders another X-ray scan on Miranda. However, Miranda convulsions and later on changes into an alien form. She murders everyone in her way until she grows weak and decides to lie in a corner. Meanwhile, Tom rushes to the hospital to see Miranda, but he encounters patients escaping from the halls. He locates Miranda, brings out an injection, and administers an unlabeled liquid into her bloodstream. The visible enlarged veins in her shoulders and neck shortly fades. Tom brings her back to their house. While she's in the car, he packs their possessions in suitcases, including their passports, because they're bound for Mexico. During the trip to Mexico, Tom reveals the painful truth to Miranda about her whole existence. It turns out, years ago, Tom used to work with a former college student, Forbes. With the help of Tom, Forbes was crazy and genius to design Miranda out of alien DNA strands mixed with human genes. However, Forbes began to abuse these experiments after successfully creating Miranda, forcing Tom to change his perception of Forbes and abandon him completely. Tom brought Miranda to another state to allow her to mature naturally and live a normal life. He also fabricated fictional stories of Miranda's parents' identity to convince her she's a normal child from normal parents, but it's all a lie. Miranda can't process her true origin, but her past origin also explains her alien transformation in the hospital and during her date last night. Miranda and Tom continue their trip. At night, they take a rest first in a hotel on the road. Miranda goes to the bathroom, where she notices the visible enlarged veins on her shoulders. She then asks Tom for help, who immediately brings out a syringe. Tom explains the syringe contains human hormones that help to suppress the alien DNA from surfacing in her body. He used to administer the hormones to Miranda 2 to 3 times a year, resulting in her normal age growth and not undergoing the chrysalis stage. However, after she begins to show symptoms of sickness, the annual dosages of human hormones don't work well anymore. Miranda's unexplainable sickness only pushes Tom more to find Forbes in his country and ask his assistance in curing her sickness, because American hospitals can't do anything about her situation. The enlarged veins in Miranda's body eventually subside, but Tom clarifies they only work temporarily, so they still need to see Forbes. While on the trip the next day, Miranda learns she's a highly functional hybrid of equal parts of human and alien DNA, giving her the ability to absorb much more information than any human can. She only needs to hold a certain book or touch a computer to scan and learn their contents. They eventually arrive in Alquizar and book themselves in a hotel room for a night's rest. The next morning, Tom goes out on the streets to ask strangers about the possible whereabouts of Forbes. Unfortunately, he only attracts some sort of hybrid like Miranda during his search. The hybrid dresses up like a nun who persistently chases after him on the road. Tom runs away from her, but she manages to catch up with him due to her heightened agility and alien genes. He nearly dies from the hybrid, but patrol cops coincidentally arrive to greet the hybrid due to her religious outfit. The hybrid is forced to let go of Tom. Tom resumes his search, but encounters an elderly man who stays in the same hotel as him. The man claims he knows where Forbes is. The man tells Tom that if he wants to meet Forbes, he needs to follow certain steps to see him. First, he needs to enter a taxicab at midnight, then gives the driver an envelope containing all information he needs from Forbes. Lastly, let the driver take him to Forbes' hideout. At midnight, Tom follows the instructions. He enters the taxicab and lets the driver do his job. However, he realizes something is wrong the moment the taxicab enters a garage. The doors shut down, trapping him inside the venue. Just then, the driver turns into an alien and tries to kill Tom. Tom evades the attacks quickly and cowers behind a car to formulate an escape plan. While the driver is busy searching for him, Tom enters the taxicab so he can ram the front bumper onto the driver, pinning him against another car. Afterward, Tom pours kerosene all over the taxicab and the driver, and then sets them on fire until the driver dies. Tom gives a quick visit to the elderly man in his hotel room to confront him about the setup trap. The man is stubborn and even dares to threaten Tom with a gun, but Miranda comes to rescue Tom. She transforms into her alien form and assaults the man to retrieve the actual home address of Forbes. On the same night, Miranda and Tom arrive at a remote warehouse that's secured with a keypad. Miranda scans the keypad to learn the passcode. They enter the warehouse in no time. They survey the place containing lab equipment, computers, and animals in the lobby. From the grounds, they hear Forbes' hormone noises with a woman. Forbes pauses his hormone session upon hearing Tom calls for his name. He goes downstairs to formally meet Miranda, whom he recognizes as the experiment G178. The woman joins the circle, and Tom recognizes her as the hybrid in a nun outfit who nearly killed him before. Forbes then introduces her as Azura, Director of Community Relations. Forbes is disappointed in Azura for keeping secrets from him, but he has foreseen it, knowing Azura doesn't possess advanced intelligence. Miranda is different because while being under Tom's care, she manages to hold advanced degrees in biochemistry and comparative literature and classics. Miranda suddenly collapses and exhibits convulsion on the floor. Tom then informs Forbes that she's sick as they put her onto the operating table. Then, they inject her human hormones to stabilize her worsening illness. Afterward, Tom learns that Forbes conducts an illegal business, where he uses alien DNA strands to somehow resurrect dead living beings for his clients in exchange for money. Tom finds his business monstrous for abusing nature, but Forbes is confident the experiments are fine, since the results eventually die in a month or two. Tom then returns the topic to Miranda, and Forbes finally explains the root cause of her sickness. Miranda is dying not from sickness, but simply because her lifespan is due. She grows up naturally, and it's the downside of humankind, mortality. Therefore, Miranda has only 1 or 2 days left before she dies completely. Forbes then offers Tom to confess to Miranda the reality that she's dying if he doesn't want to make another hybrid. Tom has to accept it, so he meets Miranda in a room to inform her that they can't do anything about her situation. The following morning, Miranda and Tom visit a chapel so Miranda can repent for her sinful murders in the hospital. She also decides to confess to the police once they get back home, if time allows her to live long enough to pay for her crimes. But Forbes interjects their conversation and asks them to come with him. Forbes then informs them about another way to extend Miranda's life, but it includes killing a person. However, Miranda doesn't want to partake in such a procedure because the whole ordeal is immoral. Miranda and Tom refuse the risky and deadly suggestion and return to their hotel room because they're about to go back home. Tom still wants to try everything to save Miranda, but she reassures him that she chooses not to extend her life anymore because she lived a fulfilled life because of him. Miranda then wonders what Tom would do once they're finished with her, and Tom claims he's going back to his mundane lifestyle. Even though Miranda convinces him to go back to his scientific calling, Tom doesn't want him anymore since he's satisfied with Miranda being his greatest scientific work in life. They are about to leave the hotel, but Miranda unexpectedly collapses once again. Tom rushes her back to the warehouse so Forbes can examine her. He concludes that they need to sedate her if they want to stabilize her body in the meantime. Forbes suggests they need a human donor soon if Tom wants to save her. Even though Tom is reluctant to conduct such a procedure, he's forced to comply because there's no other way to save Miranda. Tom obliges, and after searching for a female donor in a club, he settles with a seductive clubber. He and Azura capture the clubber and bring her to the warehouse for the stem cell transfusion. Azura sedates the clubber, then puts her and Miranda each on an exotic and alien shell. Forbes injects alien DNA strands into the clubber to start the procedure, and then once the impregnation is complete, it's time to harvest the stem cells from the clubber and into Miranda as the final step. After the transfusion, the clubber and Miranda shake in their shells as the stem cells start to infuse within Miranda's body. The shaking eventually stops when the infusion is complete, and although the process has killed the clubber, it then extends Miranda's life as expected. Miranda emerges from the shell like a newborn baby, and Tom helps her stand up. The plan happens to be successful, but something's wrong with Miranda because they notice she only cares for worldly pleasures and not knowledge and life principles like her normal self. It turns out Miranda has inherited the clubber's personality after the infusion. She doesn't even want to confess to the police anymore since she claims she wants to live an adventurous life. Miranda even dares to mate with Azura and Tom, but they reject her dirty request. Therefore, she goes out without Tom's approval to enjoy the outside world. Tom argues to Forbes that Miranda is not herself anymore because of the transfusion. However, Forbes needs to deal with his client first. Forbes and Azura then go outside to give the client her alien dog, who leaves happily and disregards the fact that her dog is half alien. Forbes meets Tom afterward and explains Miranda is not herself anymore because she carries new stem cells now. The stem cells change everything in Miranda, including her sterilization, that was modified by Tom during her younger years. Therefore, Miranda can get impregnated and spread more of her species if they don't do anything fast. Forbes only wants to help Tom, so he offers to inject hydrochloric acid into Miranda to slow her down, but Tom refuses to listen to his advice anymore after his sloppy work with Miranda. Tom searches for her outside in the hope he can save her again. He visits the church to check if Miranda is there, but he only finds Azura. Azura regrets not killing him before, so she wants to resume her initial plan of annihilation, starting with him. Fortunately, Tom throws a chalice onto a lever connecting to the crucifix, dropping the cross from its position and crushing Azura flat on the floor. Meanwhile, Miranda goes out to the hotel and club for a killing spree out of pleasure. Forbes arrives in the club on time with the hydrochloric acid on hand because he plans to sedate her. He follows her into an abandoned building when Miranda suddenly walks up behind him. She seduces Forbes into mating, and Forbes focuses on the goal of sedating her. However, Miranda senses the syringe in his hand and throws it away. She soon mates with Forbes and afterward gets impregnated by him. In the end, Miranda kills Forbes because she has no use of him anymore. Meanwhile, Tom stumbles upon Forbes' car outside the abandoned building. When he enters the building, he finds Forbes dead and Miranda unconsciously lying on the floor. Afterward, Tom rushes Miranda to the warehouse and then puts her on top of the operating table to examine her. Tom learns Miranda is pregnant via the ultrasound machine. Just then, Miranda tells Tom that he needs to kill her because her alien genes are slowly killing her human side and she doesn't enjoy letting her alien form wreak havoc in the world. Tom is about to end Miranda's life until the whole warehouse blackouts suddenly. He grabs a shotgun and searches for the culprit behind the power blackout. Azura survives the crush, intending to finish her plan. Tom tries to shoot Azura, but she's stronger than him. She nearly kills Tom, but Miranda transforms into her alien form to fight against Azura. Azura and Miranda wrestle their alien muscles until there's only one of them left. Miranda manages to kick Azura hard to knock her down, but Azura quickly recovers and pierces 2 of her tentacles into Miranda's abdomen, causing Miranda to fall onto the floor, dying. Just then, Tom regains his strength and shoots down Azura with a gun. The impact pushes Azura off the edge, resulting in a plummeting death. The movie ends with Tom successfully eliminating Azura, but fails to save Miranda from a painful death. Miranda uses her last breath to be thankful for Tom's unconditional love for her. Tom can't help but feel sad over her death, but there's more cleanup needed to do. He then opens every gas tank in the warehouse and sets the whole building ablaze to erase all the traces of Forbes' alien experiments. Tom walks away as the warehouse is engulfed with fire. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.